Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is wonderful to be here to hear this squabble about who has the most lakes. I can tell you, you can drive in Pennsylvania for a long time without seeing any lakes at all. So we're not in that. But I will say this, and I want to address a question or two to Mr. Vold, because what you describe in your background is very similar to the district that I represent, which is Lancaster County and York counties in Pennsylvania. So we are one of the top dairy producers, top 25 at least, in the country. Have over 5,000, and the size of the farms can really range from small. Obviously, we're home of the Amish, but have a lot of small family farms, but also some larger farms as well, as you were talking about. But I was very pleased that I was here in Congress when the USMCA was negotiated, and I was pleased that the negotiators, the administration, the legislature had really made the access to the dairy markets in Canada one of the top priorities. In fact, it sort of held up the final negotiations of the USMCA until that issue was at least supposedly resolved. And then it's particularly disappointing to see what's developed because I do think the USMCA as a whole was very, very good. Created a lot of new markets for a lot of products and opened those markets up to our producers. But on the dairy side, I mean, it's got to be really frustrating to you when you see one of our big partners, Canada, of course, really continue to implement policies that sort of protect their dairy producers, and you don't have access to market. I'm just curious how that makes you feel. I mean, here it's handled. We handle our dairy system is different, I should say, than what you see in Canada, and there's a lot of protection there. And how does that make you feel?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Smucker. That's a very good point. And I will say this for those of you who are not familiar with the Canadian dairy industry, that they are under a quota system in Canada, and it is a very protected group of individuals to be a part of that dairy industry. So it's frustrating for me when we put the trade agreements together like the USMCA, which you are correct. It was a good agreement. We fought to the end. Dairy was one of the spotlights of that agreement. As a dairy producer, I really felt good about the outcome of that original agreement. But I think as we've gone forward, we're continuing to see some struggles with the enforcement from the Canadian side. So when you're a U.S. dairy producer who has a very different business model than the Canadian dairy industry, where we are relying on trade, moving our product, producing our product at a very efficient level, and we follow the guidelines to be part of the safest food produced in the world. Yes, it is very frustrating for me as a producer because it does create a very unfair playing field because my income, we're talking about input costs, right now I'm producing my milk on my farm far below what my dollars coming in are. So it is a very painful time to be in the dairy industry right now.
And if that continues, you talked a little about the impact on your operation and other farmers in your area. Like, what will be the long-term impact? I wonder if you could expand on that just a little if this doesn't change, if we don't have access to the Canadian market.
Yeah, and so the long-term impacts, again, it's like I stated earlier with the situation in Wisconsin. In the U.S., our business model continues to be go big or go home sometimes, which I find frustrating. The reason we went to automated milking or robots in our facility was to create efficiencies without having to become a very large organization in order for us to compete in this environment. But if this continues, businesses like mine who have been in business for multiple generations are going to cease to exist.
Yeah. I see I'm out of time. My next question, I'd love to hear from you. This is about trade, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about tax policy, particularly tax policy in the tax bill that we passed in the early years of the previous administration. This committee obviously also works on that policy. So at some point, maybe we can have a conversation. I'd love to hear some provisions that you think are important as part of our current tax code. But I guess we'll do that another time because I see I'm out of
Great.
time. Thank you.